The Washington Post writes a story. In 1903, a black man walked into an office in a small town in Texas seeking any news about whether slavery had ended. In 1903? He's what? Excuse me? The earnest inquiry from the man who had been forced to labor without pay came more than 38 years after Major General Gordon Granger landed on Galveston Island, Texas, with more than 2,000 federal soldiers to deliver the belated news of freedom to the enslaved black people in Texas. Word of the end of bondage for more than 250,000 enslaved black people in the state arrived June 19th, 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Despite the clear instructions in General Order Number 3 and the announcement that day by Granger's men that the people in Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Now, this was a real problem in Texas. It's a state in rebellion, a state that believes in slavery, and surprise, surprise, these guys didn't want to tell their slaves, oh, you're free, because the president we're fighting against just freed you. It's not really surprising, but it's horrible. Enslavers across the state resisted the general's order, hiding the news from the enslaved black people. Many black people were forced to continue to labor under the oppression of ruthless enslavers and unscrupulous plantation owners. Last year, President Biden signed a bill to recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday. On Thursday, in advance of the holiday, human rights activists installed a 150-foot Pan-African flag garden in the Ellipse south of the White House. Now, why would we do this? The South had their own flag. America had Old Glory. America had the stars and stripes. They had the stars and bars. Excuse me? Why would we celebrate this by flying another flag? Why would we do that? By the way, do you know who the first Republican president of the GOP was in Texas? Yeah, he was a black guy. Isn't that weird? This is only being recognized now because the progressives think that they can use it against the Republican Party because people are uneducated. People in this country are, and I'm sorry, but I have come to a new conclusion about the American people. Many of them are dumb as a box of rocks. And I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with a box of rocks, but it doesn't go well. And the American people have been dumbed down and intentionally misled, and great portions of our history and things that you need to know just to survive not being taught in schools. So in honor of Juneteenth, I brought something in from the Mercury Vaults. This is the declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. This is the rough draft of the Declaration of Independence in Thomas Jefferson's own hand. Oh my gosh, Glenn Beck, how could you possibly quote Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence? I mean, Thomas Jefferson, all men are created equal. Yeah, Tom, except for all those slaves, right? That's the argument. Where are they in the Declaration of Independence? Thomas Jefferson. So this is, again, the first draft in his own handwriting. It's 4 pages long. And if you happen to be watching on the Blaze, you will see that there are corrections and things marked out and language changed. And you'll see, just like in a Word doc, it'll say B. Franklin, or it'll say Mr. Adams. And it comes off to the side to show you who made the changes. For the most part, it's it's left pretty much the same. So the first part of it is, when in the course of human events, they're basically saying, look, we're going to break up, and we think, because we try to be decent people, we think if we're going to break up with somebody, we should tell them why. And, they decided they had the other option of going, hey, King George, it's not you, it's us. But no. We decided we should tell him it is you. It is you. We really actually love you. We want to be with you, but you won't listen to us. So in this breakup letter we call the Declaration of Independence, we tell him, look, we think that just basic decency requires us to tell you what happened. And the first thing we want to tell you is you don't know us. We believe in different things. There are things that we hold self-evident that you don't. And we think these are really important. So when we break up from you, we're going to go and we're going to do our own country. But we want to tell you what we're creating and what it is that we believe that we've been trying to tell you. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And, this is where it gets sticky, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, drawing their just powers from the consent of the governed. Nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever thought that before. Completely a new idea. Can you imagine the king reading this and going, wait a minute. You're telling me that you actually believe that you, a farmer, an underling, you're equal to me, the king, and that God gave you the same rights he gives to me, and that government is going to be, the people in government are going to be voted on by the people like you. And the government is instituted to protect your rights against people like me? It's an incredible thought. Incredible thought. So he goes on and explains what we're going to create. This is our mission statement as a nation. And like mission statements usually go, they're very, very lofty and hard to obtain, but it's what drives a company. And if you have a company that's been in business for 250 years, you're going to have some problems with that business in its history. You're going to see, oh, wow, a company really went out of whack here. Walt Disney right now, he's spinning in his grave. You could make chair rails and chairs and broomsticks on his body. He's spinning so fast he's like a lathe. But they've lost it before. They lost it in the 1980s. Not like this, but they come back. I don't know if Disney's going to be able to survive the comeback this time. But the question is, are we? So we have this mission statement, and this is what Martin Luther King said in his great I Have a Dream speech. He's like, America, it's in your own documents. Just live up to those things. So he spells it all out, and then he says, and we need to tell you that it's not us, it is you. And these are called usurpations, and it's 2.5 pages of just quick, one line. He refused to pass the laws of accommodation for large districts of people. Okay. So that's one of them. And they just list all of these. And again, it's about 2.5 pages. And they're all 1 or 2, maybe 3 lines at most. But in the usurpation section, the last paragraph, and it's half a page, is one usurpation. So we've always wondered, how could Thomas Jefferson, how could you possibly quote that racist bigot slave owner who only cared about money? He'd write beautiful things, but then he'd do the opposite. He had slaves, and he didn't even point out that all men are created equal. That includes the slaves who are men, right? Ask yourself as I read this to you, why you didn't learn this in history. Halfway down the second page, the third page, second of the usurpations, the last usurpation comes. The last thing the king did that they could not tolerate and had to break up. And it says, and I quote, "The king has waged cruel war against nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither." So he's either talking about the slaves here from Africa and saying the king brought them over here, or he's talking about Willy Wonka and the Oompa Loompas. He's clearly talking about the slaves that the king brought to America. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of underlined infidel powers, is the warfare of the printed and underlined Christian King of Great Britain, determined to keep an open market where men, capitalized, where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt but to prohibit or restrain this horrible commerce, and that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us, to purchase that liberty of which he, underline, has deprived them of, by murdering the people on whom he has also offended, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes he wages for them to commit against the lives of another. He goes on how many times they tried to end slavery, and all of the times he frustrates it, twists it, refuses to let it pass. So an entire paragraph is taking down the king. It's clear when reading this, at least with Thomas Jefferson, this is the most important reason we broke away. This had to be unanimous, this declaration, or the king would weasel his way in between the colonies and break them apart. So every line of this rough draft had to be voted on. So we are such a horrible racist. We only cared about money and oppression. How many of the 13 colonies voted against that paragraph? I'll give that to you here in 60 seconds. How many states actually voted against that paragraph? Out of the 13 colonies, how many? 2. It was South Carolina and Georgia. Those 2 were the only 2 that voted against. That means 11 states wanted this horror show of states to stop, but they couldn't. They could not be split on that. If the king could have Georgia and South Carolina, he could break up the whole movement. So they dropped that. But did you know that if New England itself, New York and everything north, New England, if that were a country and not part of England, if it was independent, it would have been 50 years before the British banned slavery. They were so far ahead of their time. This is the first area that banned slavery like that. That was the United States of America for the most part. And they were 50 years ahead of everyone else. How come we don't get credit for that? How come the 11 states that voted against slavery don't get credit for that? because of a political agenda. And in states like Texas and elsewhere, as soon as people got voting rights, the Klan came around and tried to disarm people. Well, what a surprise. The same party that did that to black people are now trying to disarm the United States of America and all of our citizens. They found a new way to do it. Coerce companies and tell them they have to stop making ammo. The White House denies this. We have the evidence that it's happening.